الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. We welcome the dear brothers and sisters again for another lesson from our lessons from the book Kitab at-Tawheed, and using the book al-Mufid ala Kitab at-Tawheed as the basis for this. And this is all so we that can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about his Tawheed, singling out Allah alone for all worship, for all our beliefs and all these matters, and finding out the best students who were there at that time with this messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best students, his companions radiyallahu anhum ajma'een, may Allah be pleased with all of them. So we're looking at learning about the Tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're still continuing with chapter 9 in this book, this amazing book, and this great book in the way that it's arranged. The arrangement of the book is very, very good, and the way it flows is excellent. And we're looking at the chapter of what is mentioned of slaughtering an animal for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لِغَيْرِ that which is mentioned for slaughtering an animal for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is connected to Tawheed, because all our actions, because we acquire the animal, the sheep, the cow, the goat, camel, chicken, whatever, through our wealth. And this is a sacrifice that we make, and we slaughter the animal for Allah's sake. So the first evidence that Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah brought was the ayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's saying, قُلْ إِنَّ الصَّلَاةِ وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ. Say, verily, my prayer, my sacrifice, my living and my dying are for Allah, the Lord of al-Alameen, yani Lord of all that exists. He has no partner, and of this I have been commanded. I am the first of the Muslimin. You see the verse that he brought as an evidence to show that slaughter can only be for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And today we're looking at the next evidence that Muhammad Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah brought, and we're going to look at what our Shaykh al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah said regarding this evidence. And this is on the 19th of Rajab in the year 1441 al-Hijrah, corresponding to the 14th of March in the year 2020. So the evidence here, he says, the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Therefore turn in prayer to your Lord and sacrifice only to Him. This is from Surah Al-Kawthar, a very small surah, 3 ayat in that surah. A very small surah, but it's very strong in its meaning and weighty in its benefits. So this ayah tells us, after the Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, he says, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Inna a'taynaka al-Kawthar, that after Allah mentions indeed that we gave you al-Kawthar, which is a lake in paradise. The Shaykh said, and this ayah, فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ, and therefore turn in prayer to your Lord and sacrifice only to Him, is due to that reason. The Shaykh says, due to Him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving you this lake in paradise, then pray to your Lord and sacrifice as a shukran lillah ta'ala ala hadihi ni'mah, as being in gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this great blessing. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Therefore turn in prayer to your Lord and sacrifice only to him. The Shaykh said that the intent here with as-salah is the prayer, the salah, not the dua. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ. Make your prayer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, as regards for sacrificing, it means here, because the word is used, wanhar, it actually means a-dhabh, yani slaughtering. That, the Shaykh said, it means that make your slaughter for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just like you made your prayer for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This word, wanhar, carries on from the word fasal, fasalli li rabbi, fasalli, carries on from that. It's connected to that. So the Shaykh says, from this we find this, from this noble ayah, that slaughtering is from worship, is an act of worship. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered it with it, and he connected it up to prayer. Now this means that for us, that we only slaughter for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like we mentioned before in a previous lesson, and the Shaykh spoke about this, that a person can slaughter for when he receives a guest, he slaughters an animal, or he slaughters for shukr lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we'll see that later on in this explanation, for the Hajj, or slaughtering as a fidya, a ransom for not completing the Hajj, and other means as well. But the point being here that this is done purely for Allah's sake. The intention is that it's done for Allah's sake. It doesn't mean that you can't, slaughter or sacrifice something for somebody. No, it means the actual slaughter, it's done for Allah's sake. The actual slaughter, we can look at it later, inshallah, in other lessons, about where it's permissible to, when we actually slaughter the animal, to say Bismillah and these type of things. But so here the Shaykh talks about wanhar, this word wanhar, and sacrifice only to him. The Shaykh says this is a general word, and sacrifice only to him, he said, is mutlaq, is open, and it is for everything which is affirmed in the Sharia and is permissible in the Sharia. Everything which is established and affirmed in the Sharia. So we sacrifice everything to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said here, it mentions 3 points, or 3 types of these type of sacrifices. He said the first one is al-udhiyah, al-adahi, al-udhiyah, al-hadahi. The second is al-hadaya, and the third one, aqa'iq. So the first one is al-udhiyah. This is when a person slaughters, like for example, when a person doesn't go on the Hajj pilgrimage, and it's on the Eid day, we are required to slaughter, and the Shaykh talks about this later on. We are required, the man of the house, of the household, or the person of the household, is required to slaughter one animal, a goat, a sheep, or like this, for the family, Okay, this is al-udhiyah. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for having completed or close to completing the Hajj, is an act of worship of the Hajj. And aqa'iq is aqiqah, when a person is blessed with a child, with offspring, that for that gratitude, that he slaughters an animal, distributes the food, or gives the food out to and feeds people. So all of these acts are done for the sake of Allah, as an act of worship, for gratitude. So the Shaykh mentions these three types: al-udhiyah, al-hadi, and aqiqah. The Shaykh says, and these 3 are required from a person to carry out. He says for the hadi, there's that which is wajib, and there's that which is mustahab. There's that which is obligatory, and that which is recommended. He said, as for the wajib one, then it's in the Hajj tamattu. Hajj, pilgrimage to Makkah, is of different types. There's 3 different types, and the one that is the strongest opinion is that it is the Hajj at-Tamattu'. Hajj at-Tamattu' is when a person arrives to Mecca, he performs an Umrah. He performs the Umrah. And then after that, he comes out of his Ihram, state of Ihram, and then goes back into his Ihram on the 8th day of Dhul Hijjah. On the 8th day of Dhul Hijjah, goes back into Ihram and he starts his rituals and rites of the Hajj, the rites of Hajj. So that's Hajj at-Tamattu'. Yeah, that is when he does an Umrah and then he goes into the Hajj. There are other forms of Hajj as well. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, the Shaykh brings us evidence, فَمَنْ تَمَتَّعَ بِالْعُمْرَ إِلَى الْحَجِّ فَمَا اسْتَيْسَرَ مِنَ الْحَدِي. So if you perform the Umrah before the Hajj, okay, then you should bring that which is easy for you from al-hadi, yani slaughter. Day, you slaughter, slaughter, uh, you slaughter for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You slaughter an animal and you do some other rites as well. So that's that Hajj, as Hajj at-Tamattu'. So you slaughter an animal, and this is wajib for the one who's doing Hajj at-Tamattu'. And this was done by the Prophet ﷺ, and this was something that he said that this is for everyone. Is it just for the companions asked, is it just for our time? He said, no, this is for continuous. So when a person performs Hajj and he wants to do the best Hajj, then Hajj at-Tamattu' is the best one. That he does an Umrah, and then he goes into the Hajj, and he slaughters an animal for that Hajj. So that Hajj is Hajj at-Tamattu'. Then the Shaykh mentions another ayah that when a person is prevented from completing the Hajj, from completing the Hajj, فَإِنْ أُحْسِرْتُمْ فَمَا اسْتَيْسَرَ مِنَ الْحَدِي. So if you have been prevented from the Hajj, from completing the Hajj, then you should sacrifice a hadi. Yeah, that you should sacrifice an animal, and this is the case as a now delegate someone to do that on their behalf and pay them for it and to slaughter an animal there. Otherwise, unless they had said the dua, there's a dua that the Prophet ﷺ used to say, and our Shaykh Ubayd al-Jabiri, حفظه, he mentions that this dua is only said when a person knows that he may not be able to, or he has doubt that he'll be able to complete his umrah. For example, a sick person that he has doubt that he is able to complete his umrah. So he says this dua, Allahumma mahalli haythu habastani. Oh Allah, my place is where you have restricted me. So if he says this dua, or for example a woman on her menses, she was not able to complete her umrah in the time allocated, she says this dua, perhaps she might not be able to, and then she's not required to slaughter, or a sick person, or a person whose cars, has got a dodgy car, his cars won't be able to make it to Mecca, and he's driving, but he says, oh, I don't know if my car will make it, and he says this dua at the time of making the intention for Umrah, and then he doesn't have to make a slaughter. Whereas if somebody knows that they're going to be able to do Umrah, then they don't need to say this dua, and they shouldn't say this dua, and our Shaykh says only when there's doubt that he's not going to be able to complete his Umrah. Otherwise, the person has to slaughter. So this is the case and the situation with these people, and Allah knows best. As far as I know, when a person shaves his head, he's talking about the Hajj. It says, فَفِدْيَةٌ مِّن صِيَامٍ أَوْ صَدَقَةٍ أَوْ نُسُكٍ. Yeah, pay a fidya, a ransom of either fasting for 3 days, or sadaqah of feeding 6 people, or a sacrifice, or a slaughter. The Shaykh says, true. If this is correct, then we say it is a hadi. It's better to call it a fidya, a ransom, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned. And this is a compensation, a kafara, for this, for doing an act in Hajj which is a wrong action in the Hajj, basically. Then the Shaykh goes on to talk about the third type. So the first was the hadi during the Hajj, and the second type, which is al-udhiya. The udhiya, here the Shaykh says, is when somebody slaughters an animal for somebody. Yeah, so in the one who doesn't go to Hajj, he slaughters an animal for his household. The Shaykh said here, and this is a very important point, he said, this is not done for the dead. Slaughtering is not done on behalf of the dead, like many of the general people do. In fact, it is done for the living. As for the dead, then the Shaykh says, it is not legislated to slaughter for the dead person, the deceased, individually. Okay? Because he said, except if that person willed that, or he wrote that in a will, and he wanted that done for him. Yeah, he gave the wasiyah, bequeathed that. Okay, so if somebody did do that, then it should be fulfilled, because he mentions that this was not done by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, in this issue, Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, in another book, in another place, he mentions that it is permissible for a person to slaughter for his parents, his mother or his father. He says it's permissible for him to slaughter for his parents, so his mother or his father. It's permissible for his mother or his father. So, for example, a person buys a sheep and he goes to the butchers and he says that I want to slaughter for this, for my father, so the reward and these matters will go to his father, then this is permissible. Or for the mother. These are some circumstances, and we know the situations where this is permissible are very few. There are very few matters where the blessings of something, the reward for something, can be passed on to the deceased. There's very few matters actually in the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal. We find Muslims practicing all types of things to pass the blessing on to the dead. And the main one that they do is reading the Quran to pass the blessing on to the dead. So when someone dies, an uncle or an aunt or a relative, everybody gets together in the house and they start passing out ajza, parts of the Quran, and they ask people to recite this and pass the blessing on to the dead. And this is not permissible. This is an innovation which is not permissible. Rather, in fact, that this action is an act of the Hindus from India. Yeah, the Hindus, they practice these type of, they have these type of rituals. For the Muslims, this is not permissible, to read the Quran to pass a blessing on to the dead. It is permissible, and your parents get reward for every time you recite Quran. Yes, the scholars mention, Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah, and the other scholars mention that it is permissible for the child to when a child reads Quran, any good action that the child does, the reward also goes to the parents as well. The reward also goes to the parents as well. So reading Quran, automatically the reward goes to your parents. Giving charity, automatically any good action that you do, the reward automatically goes on. But to do a specific thing, like reading Quran, then this is not permissible. This is not permissible as like for other relatives. And even then, when we do it for our parents, it's not like after we raise our hands and make dua and pass the blessing onto the dead, oh Allah, pass the reward. No, it's automatic. So here, slaughtering, the Shaykh mentioned in another place that it is permissible for the parents. It is permissible for the parents, but not for distant relatives. For distant relatives. So for an uncle or an aunt or anybody like this, it is not permissible to do that. The Shaykh actually talks about that. Anybody says it's permissible for his parents. Because here he mentions generally, okay, generally, from the outset that it's not permissible, but for parents it is permissible to slaughter for them. So if somebody does that, it is permissible. This is a good act. Then the third type the Shaykh mentions is the aqiqah. The aqiqah is when a person is blessed with a child, that he slaughters an animal for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Shaykh said, and this is slaughtering for offspring, for a child, on the 7th day. On the 7th day the child is born. Within that time, a person slaughters if he can. Obviously, if he has the ability to do so, capability. The Shaykh said, if it's a boy child, then you slaughter 2 animals, and if it's a girl child, then you slaughter 1. And the Shaykh said, if it's in financial straits, if for financial difficulties, even 1 is permissible for a boy child. The Shaykh said, and this is the sunnah for which is mentioned by most of the people of knowledge, and some of the people of knowledge mention that it is wajib. It is wajib because the Prophet ﷺ said that every child is mortgaged with his aqiqah. Is mortgaged with his aqiqah. Okay. This hadith has been mentioned in Sunan Nisa'i and Tirmidhi and other places by Imam Ahmad. So this is the aqiqah. So this is the third type of sacrifice that we do for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next evidence that Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah brings for this point of slaughtering for other than Allah is a hadith. And as we know from the style and the works of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah, he first brings an ayah in the Quran or a couple of ayat, then the hadith, and then a statement from the Salaf or the Sahaba. The Salaf being the Sahaba. So here the hadith that he mentions is the hadith from Ali radiyallahu anhu, who said, Hadathani Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bi arba kalimatin, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned to me 4 statements. La'ana Allahu man dhabaha li ghayrillah, that Allah cursed the one who slaughtered for other than Allah. La'ana Allahu man la'ana walidayhi, Allah cursed the one who cursed his parents. La'ana Allahu man awa muhdithan, Allah cursed the one who protects a person of innovation. La'ana Allah man ghayyara manar al-ard, that Allah cursed the one who changes the signposts on the land. It changes the signposts and directions on the land, on the earth. And this hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim. It's a very important hadith. Why? Because it mentions about the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And any evidence that shows from the ayat of Allah or the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the aspect of fire or a curse, these are very serious matters. Very serious hadith. Okay? And this hadith, in itself, this hadith, as we mentioned in the books of Kaba'ir. Kaba'ir are the major sins. Some sins are lesser and some sins are major. Okay? Some sins have been mentioned along with the fire, and some sins have been mentioned just generally. Not to do this and don't do that, and this is not permissible and this is haram. But some sins have been mentioned along with the fire and the cursing, and that what puts them into the grade of al-kaba'ir, yani major sins. And there have been a few books written by the scholars of regarding al-kaba'ir, collections of hadith of kaba'ir. And this hadith, the one Allah curses the one who slaughters for other than Allah, this hadith has been mentioned by Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah in his book al-Kaba'ir. In his book al-Kaba'ir. And these actions, all these actions are from the kaba'ir al-dhunub, from the major sins. So whoever slaughters for other than Allah, anyone who curses his parents, anyone who protects the person of innovation, and anyone who changes signposts to mislead the people on the land, on the earth, then these are from the major sins, that they will definitely be punished for those sins if Allah wills. If Allah wants, He will definitely punish for those sins. So the first one here, he mentions that in this hadith, even though he mentions arba kalimat, there are different ahadith which mention different things that Allah cursed. Okay, Allah cursed. So we have to be very careful, and we have to be very aware and learn those aspects that which cause the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here, our Shaykh Muhammad Salih ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he said, the curse of Allah means they curse from Allah. And this is being rejected and far away from the mercy of Allah. Al-la'an, okay, the curse is at-tard wal-ib'ad an rahmatillah. It is a being rejected and turned away and being far from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the Shaykh says, so if somebody says Allah's curse is upon him, the meaning is that he's far from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or if somebody says, oh Allah, curse such and such person, then take him away from your mercy. Okay? Take him away from your mercy. And we know, and we'll see later on as well, that a Muslim is not one who curses. A Muslim, a believer, from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentions that a believer is not somebody who curses. Who curses. Yani curses a lot. If he mistakenly says something or curses or something, then this is different. But al-la'an, the word is actually mentioned, mean kathrat al-la'an. Yani he shouldn't curse. And a Muslim doesn't do that anyway. A believer is not someone who goes around cursing people. Rather, he's gentle and soft with the people. But these are general curses that these curses that the Prophet said. These are general curses for a major sins. General, because he didn't point out the person that he cursed, but he did a major. These are for major sins. Major sins. Okay. So a Muslim is not like that. He's not somebody who goes around cursing people. He doesn't curse people. There are circumstances, and these are very few, and this is only done by those people of knowledge, students of knowledge who understand, have taken into consideration all the situation and circumstances. This is not something that is done by us for anyone, okay, for anyone. Generally, yes, we say Allah's curse is upon the one who slaughters for other than Allah. Allah's curse is on one who curses his parents. Allah's curse is on the one who protects and defends the people of bid'ah, yeah, who protects them. Allah's curse is on the one who changes the signpost to mislead the people on the land. Yeah, we say these, okay, but it's not something which flows off of our tongue. Yeah, and this is a very important point that we'll see later on as well, and Shaykh al-Uthaymeen talks about this as well. So the Shaykh said, whoever slaughters for other than Allah, this includes slaughtering a sheep or a goat or a cow or a chicken or other than this. And for other than Allah, and this means, the Shaykh says, this includes slaughtering for the Prophet or for an angel or for a jinn or for anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next one the Shaykh mentions is the one who slaughters, one who curses his parents. The Shaykh says he curses them and he swears at them. Sabbahuma wa shatamahuma. Yani he curses them or he swears at them. So So if a person, the Shaykh said here explaining, he says, if a person curses his parents, sorry, if a person curses another person, swears at another person, then this person himself is cursed. Because the Prophet was said to him, Shaykh says, it was said to the Prophet, how can a person curse his parents? And it was such a horrible matter, such a disgusting matter. How can a person actually curse his parents? So the Prophet said that a man curses a man's father, somebody else's father, and that person curses his father. A man curses somebody else's father, and that man curses his father. And a man curses somebody else's mother, then that other person curses his mother. And this is a hadith which is mentioned in Bukhari and in Muslim. So this is a form of when a person eventually or inevitably ends up, when he curses somebody's father or mother, ends up cursing his own father and mother. Okay. The next one is, the next type is that a person, the Prophet ﷺ cursed somebody who protected a person of innovation. Okay, protected a person of innovation. Before we look into this, we need to see a matter which is very, very important, which is to see who actually is a person of innovation. Yeah, because this hadith mentions Allah curses the one who protects, and the Shaykh mentions one who ascribes a innovator to himself and protects him. Okay, so here we have to understand this concept. Who is an innovator? Who is a mubtadi'? Because just by a person doing an innovation doesn't necessarily mean that he's an innovator. Doesn't necessarily mean he's an innovator. Likewise, just because a person falls into kufr, it doesn't make him a kafir. Okay, just because a person falls into kufr doesn't make him a kafir. And this is a very important point. Why? Because the Khawarij, they run with this. They love this type of thing. This is that thing that excites them so much, that they love to hear or to see somebody falling in mistakenly into kufr, because they love and race to pronounce takfir on them, to excommunicate them, say that these people are kuffar, look what they're doing, they've made kufr, so he's a kafir. Yani they get a buzz out of this, they enjoy this. Okay, and this is not permissible in Islam. This is something we have to be very, very careful of. Okay, so we find that we have to be careful on who we or not us really, but the scholars, they are the ones who apply this label of mubtadi'. The scholars and the students of knowledge and the people of knowledge, they're the ones that apply this. It's not something that we should rush to do. Yes, if we see somebody regularly doing bid'ah, or our neighbor or something, and then we can warn against that person and say he does these type of acts, but to actually label him, then we don't do. We leave this up to the scholars or the people of knowledge and students to do this. Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, the bid'ah by which a person would be counted as from the Ahlul Ahwa, the people who follow desires, is that which is well known by the people of knowledge of the Sunnah, in it opposing the book and the Sunnah. So that those actions what a person does, or beliefs that a person holds, which oppose the book and the Sunnah, okay, clearly, okay, which are understood, well known by the people of knowledge, okay, then that person is accounted as from being from the Ahlul Bid'ah, Ahlul Ahwa. And Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah continues, he says, such as the bid'ah of the Khawarij, the Rawafidah, the Qadariyah and the Murji'ah. The Khawarij, they're the ones that pronounced takfir. He pronounced takfir on the Muslims, and excommunicated and kicked them out of Islam. The Rafida, they ascribed divinity to their imams, and they did so many other innovations. The Qadariya, they said that we don't have the Qadr doesn't apply to us, and these type of matters. And the Murja, they said that Iman doesn't increase or decrease. These are just basic signs of an article which has been translated, and it's actually called Who is a Muqtada' Innovator? Who is an innovator? If you type that up, you'll find an article, a compilation of these type of statements. A statement of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, a few statements, and a few statements from our Shaykh Rabi' ibn Hadi al-Madkhali. And he in that it explains when is a person treated as Ahlul Bidah, And this is a very, very important point, because sometimes when we fall into discussions, we fall into debates, just because the way the person debates, it seems to us that that person is from Ahlul Bidah, where in reality he may not be from Ahlul Bidah. He may not be from Ahlul Bidah. So we leave these matters up to the scholars to deal with, because it is their responsibility, not our responsibility. It's their responsibility to label label these type of things and warn us against this. So it's a very important article which we need to read and understand, and maybe in the future, if Allah gives us the capability to actually explain it and give a dars on that itself. We have mentioned points like this before, because they're very, very important, but in detail, this is maybe requires a whole lecture in itself. Coming back to what the Shaykh said, Shaykh al-Uthaymeen, he said, Allah's the hadith mentions Allah's curse is on the one who protects a innovator. The Shaykh mentions al-ihdath, yani innovation, incorporates innovation in the deen, like the bid'ah which was innovated by the Jahmiyyah and the Mu'tazila. The Jahmiyyah rejected rejected the sifat and asma of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Mu'tazila and others from them applied the intellect to the texts. And the Shaykh said, well, ihdath fil amr, so the first one, ihdath in the deen, and ihdath fil amr, and this is, the Shaykh said, this is regarding the affairs of the ummah, like the crimes and what is similar to that type of stuff. So the Shaykh said, whoever protects a innovator, then he is mal'oon, then he is someone that is cursed. And the Shaykh said, likewise is someone who aids them. Who aids a mubtada' is likewise like that, yani he is cursed. So these are very, very important matters which a Muslim needs to inquire about, yani find out about the details of this, so he doesn't fall into this under this title and fall into this, because these are, the Shaykh said, these are very severe and important matters. Then the Shaykh goes on later to talk about that in this statement of the Prophet ﷺ is a tahdhir, a warning against from bid'ah, innovation, and innovating into the religion. The Shaykh said that the Prophet ﷺ said, إِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتَ الْأَمُورِ, beware and careful of innovative matters. فَإِنَّ كُلَّ بِدَةٍ فَإِنَّ كُلَّ بِدَةٍ دَلَالَةٍ, that every innovation is misguidance. Every innovation is misguidance. And the Shaykh says that from the apparentness of this hadith, that is, even if it's a small matter, even if it's a small issue, still it's something which is warned against. Then the Shaykh goes on to talk about the hadith, the part of the hadith, minar al-ard, yani signposts on the land. Here the Shaykh says the signs and posts which show, which show the limits, say from Brisbane to Melbourne, or from Brisbane to Sydney, how far it is, how long it is, the direction. So if someone comes along and turns those signs to a different direction, to Adelaide or somewhere, whatever, and he goes to the wrong place. Okay, so so the Shaykh says, whoever changes these signposts out of dhulm, then he's mal'oon. And he does this to oppress people, then he's mal'oon, then he's cursed. And the Shaykh says, how many, and here it brings something specific. He says, how many of the people change the signposts on the land, especially when it comes to people buying plots of land, and they want to increase the price of that land. So they say, rather than this signpost being here, meaning limiting my land, I'll make it, change the size of the land. For example, when in certain countries where you can buy land, okay, you buy land and you put the markers out to say that this is my land, and someone pushes that boulder or pushes that signpost further to say, it's bigger. The Shaykh says, what the Prophet ﷺ said regarding this is that whoever takes a piece of land oppressively, whoever takes a piece of land oppressively, the increase of his land even for a handspan, he said, whoever takes a piece of land even for a handspan oppressively, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts a necklace of 7 earths around his neck. As a punishment, he'll be placed with 7 earths, planet earths around his neck. So imagine the punishment that a person will be given for just taking a handspan of land, oppressively, illegally. This is your land, 20 meters by 20 meters, and you say, no, let me take a couple of meters extra, or a meter extra, or just a handspan extra. Let me just push it. Rather, a person is very careful of how much he's taken. And the Shaykh says, and this is a great matter, taking a piece of land, and he's changing the signposts of those lands, because the Shaykh says he's taken something which is not rightfully his. And he said, perhaps a person benefits in this world, but he might die before he even benefits from it. Or perhaps he takes his land and he's afflicted with many hardships and difficulties. So the Shaykh says, so in a summary, that this is a proof that changing the markers on the land is from the kaba'ir al-dhunub, from the major sins, And this is why the Shaykh said, this is why the Prophet ﷺ connect this up with shirk and disobedience to your parents, and to protecting innovations, which indicate to how great or how horrible these matters are, and it is wajib on a Muslim to warn against them and to fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so he doesn't fall into them. Muhammad Abdul-Wahhāb rahimahullah brings another evidence, and there are some other important points which Shaykh al-Uthaymeen talks about in his explanation, and inshallah we'll cover that in our next lesson, hopefully being able to finish this chapter, and maybe we'll start the next chapter inshallah bi'idhnillah. Jazakumullahu khairan for listening. May Allah reward the dear brothers and sisters who organize these lectures. If there was any shortcomings in what I said, then that is from myself and shaitan, and all that was good came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illallah anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.